Hi, everyone, and welcome to this Instagram Live that I'm really, really excited to do with the founder of Relationshipi, Sargita Sobel. Hi, Sargita.
Hi. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so nice. So Relationshipi has really quietly been making a revolution in the Shalom Bayis in our community. And by our community, I don't mean just in our actual community, Crown Heights. I mean around the world, across many different backgrounds. And the truth is, I have interviewed Sargita before on a different podcast, and I'm happy to be sitting with her again. Every time I hear a class or something from Sargita, I learn something new. And for me personally, I've taken some workshops of Relationshipi, and I think that what's so unique about the program is that it could take an amazing marriage and make it even more incredible. And it could take a really struggling marriage and really, really help and grow. And that's because the principles are so foundational. They're so incredible. And I really learn a lot from that. So I'm very grateful to you, Sargita. When the community offered different classes, I think that for me, it was so eye-opening because I had no idea. Like when there's like little kids that learn how to read young, they don't know how to pronounce the word. Like I remember I pronounced the word melancholy. I didn't even know it was like melancholy till I was like an adult. And I think I might even still be pronouncing it wrong because you don't even know what you're reading. So I think there's certain terms in Hasidus also that you might be saying, mashpia, mekabel. I had no idea what that meant. I had no idea what it meant to be a mekabel. And I thought that being feminine was these little dainty, flowery, and I felt like that's just not me. It was just not my type. I thought that the whole makabel was do you know what I mean? People that are just easy to be stepped on. And I was like, that's not me. I'm strong, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely an arrogance that came with it. And I think that Relationshipi is really humbling, and I like it. It actually feels better to be in such a place. And it really helped me understand certain key things about mashpia, about makabel, about relationships, about, and even bringing Hashem into marriage. Do you know what I mean? We think that we are with our spouse in our own home, doing this in our own, but it actually amazes me how you integrate so beautifully, such spiritual concepts into such down-to-earth relationships. So yeah, it's really exciting.
I
want to dive in by asking questions because you know what? I think that there are a lot of myths around, and I think that the more people learn, the more the questions kind of fade away. And I think that your approach is different. So it's only natural for people to say, what is this thing that goes contrary to everything we've heard since the day we were born? So I'd like to explore some of these, maybe, common myths that are myths according to what you teach, and just learn a little bit the nuance of what are some really helpful things. And what I've seen about Relationshipi also is that we're not giving you tips and tricks. It's not a script, let me run and get the book for the script, even though it might include sample conversations, but you really get to the core of the relationship. And I love that. So I want to start with the biggest one, because on any Facebook group that you'll see, somebody will post anonymous a situation with her and her husband and a challenge she might have in Shalom Bayis, and everybody, or almost everybody, responds immediately. Communicate. Are you communicating? Communication is everything.
Yeah.
And I know that you say that's a little bit like a myth. And I'm like, why is that a myth? Aren't you supposed to communicate everything? You can't be hiding things from your husband. You have to say it the way it is. So do you mean communicate differently? Do you mean not to communicate? What do you mean when you say that communication is everything is a myth?
Yeah. It's a great question. And it's such a common pitfall because, like you said, it's touted as the relationship answer. If I could only communicate well enough in a way that the other person can hear, then if they care about me, then, they'll support, they'll follow through. So the problem with the communication is what is preceding my communication. There's what I'm actually saying, and then there's a perspective that's driving what I'm saying. You know, if you're walking with your child in the park and they want ice cream and you don't have ice cream to give them, and they fall apart and they scream and they're communicating at the top of their lungs that they want ice cream, well, they're communicating, but what are they communicating? There's no goal. There's nowhere where you can get with that communication because you don't have ice cream to give them.
Well, so, go to the store and get it.
Right. Go to the store and get it. Do whatever you need to do to make that ice cream materialize. So, but that interaction can be very stressful. So it's the same thing when we are communicating with our spouse. There's what we're communicating, but then there's the whole process that comes before it that's so important to explore. What's the perspective that's driving this communication? Is it going to actually get me what I'm wanting? You know, as an adult, when a child is screaming for ice cream and you don't have it for them, it's our position as a mommy to understand that they're tired, they are hot, they want something cold, they want something sweet, they might be feeling agitated. So we can go ahead and we can acknowledge that for them. But in an adult to an adult conversation, we really need to be able to do that for ourselves and look inside before I communicate to make sure that I'm centered, I'm grounded, and I have a vision of what I'm hoping to gain by this conversation and where this communication will actually lead me. So, for example, I'll just give a quick example about this. Let's say a woman feels that her husband is not connecting to her. So a communication would be, a standard communication would be to let him know, I feel like we haven't connected, or you're not really connecting to me, or we haven't connected in a while, and like, let's go out or something. Let's do something together. Now, if what's driving that communication is this energy of, you're not there for me, especially if it's something that she shared before, that, you know, she wants more time with him and he's busy with this or with that, and she feels like he's just not there for her. So that communication feels like a bid for care. But like the child who's screaming about the ice cream, where is it going to get you? Often what happens, you think you're communicating clearly, but what the other person hears is a criticism. You're not there for me. You don't care about me. And meanwhile, they're committed to you. Of course they care about you, right? So that communication can feel hurtful. So now, instead of responding with care, the husband might respond defensively and say, what do you mean? We just went out last week. Or what do you mean? We spent time, last night. Or what do you mean? Of course I care about you. I provide for you. And the woman's like, what? That's not what I meant, right? So here's just a little tidbit of how conversations can just downward spiral by seemingly basic communication that could be completely different if I understood how to examine my perspectives that come before the communication. So one of the principles is trust the connection. And it comes from the Medrash about Aaron Akain. And the point is that when we trust connection, we build connection. When we question connection, we call connection into question. So if I want to communicate, to generate more connection, then I want to be sure that my communication is trusting of our connection.
So what would that look like?
Mm-hmm. So what that would look like is to, first of all, get centered in, of course he cares about me. I know he cares. I choose to trust he cares. That's a big one. I can choose, even if I don't feel so secure in it right then, I can choose to trust he cares. And then I can say simply, I've been dreaming about going out with you. I'd love to go out tomorrow. Or I miss you, it's been a while, but I might even be saying the same words. But if my perspective behind it is aligned with trusting our connection, that communication will come out completely differently.
It won't come across critical.
Correct. The Rebbe says in Hayom Yom Yodal Shvat that when the Rebbeim would have a practice to bringing their Hasidim to mind, and he says there that when just like when you look at somebody, they have to turn around, right? You're admiring someone's sheitel, and they turn around, you're like, whoops, that was embarrassing, right? Why? What are they feeling? What they're feeling is they're feeling your focus. Our thoughts are actually an energy that conveys, that transfers. And the Rebbe says there that it awakens the core of the person's neshama. So if I am focusing on something, that energy is going to be conveyed in what I'm sharing. And that takes focused effort to really examine, which is why we encourage women to get coaching, not because anything is necessarily wrong, but because the process of examining, like, where is my thought patterns? Where are my perspectives holding? How am I showing up energetically in this marriage is so fundamental, so critical.
Wow. So what I'm hearing you saying about communication is everything is that it's almost misleading, because the assumption of that statement is that, the words themselves are where they're at. And I think you're saying the exact opposite. The words have to be a continuation of a proper thought process, not coming from a place of like complaining, but more coming from a place of like trusting the connection and just wanting more connection, and not coming across attacking.
Yeah.
So, along those lines of communication and how you communicate, and along the lines of like the helpful Facebook advice. And when I mean Facebook, I mean also a bunch of yentas in a circle or anybody. Another like thing that I hear very often is like, you have to put up better boundaries. Like, all the time I'll hear people telling a wife, like, you have to make sure your husband comes on time, and you have to tell him when he has to be home, or, with the neatness, or, often, people will like, almost like, oh, the husband's incompetent, let me tell the wife, or whatever it is. And, lay down the law, lay down the boundaries. They obviously have good intentions. They wouldn't be giving it as marriage advice if they didn't have good intentions. So I'm curious, like, what is there any merit in setting boundaries, and how do women go about that in the wrong way if there is merit in it?
Yeah. Boundaries is another really hot one. And the problem with boundaries, and I'm going to say this carefully because I don't want, it can be really, feel really personal to women. And what we're not saying is that you should, again, like you said in the beginning, what people assume it means is, okay, so then just, you're a doormat, let everyone just walk over you. That's not what we're talking about here. There's a way how to honor yourself. And that is a very deep process. But the boundaries themselves, boundary setting, puts the other person across a divide. So what happens when I'm with a boundary is that there's an assumption there that I need to protect myself. And just like we said, that the perspectives, our mindset of how we show up in our relationship is going to drive the rest of our interactions. It's going to determine the quality of our interactions. Setting a boundary with that subtle underlying energy of protecting myself, by definition, is also conveying you are a threat. Now, we're not saying that, you're a threat, and most of the times we're not even aware of it, that we're conveying that. But if you think about it, if I need to protect myself from you, then that protection is conveying that you are likely to compromise me in some way. And I need to make sure that that doesn't happen. So honoring myself comes with a perspective that I'm not assuming that you have any negative intentions or that you're out to compromise me in any way, right? And at the same time, I know how to honor myself. So it's different than setting a boundary in that, let me give you an example. I think it's easiest to work with a practical example. I was once working on a project, and I called the lady that I was working in connection with, and it was too late for her, right? So she told me, she shared that it was too late for her, and then she shared, after 9:30, it's not appropriate to call unless you're close family, right? So she made a boundary. Don't call me after 9:30. After 9:30, it's not appropriate to call unless you're a close family. No problem. The problem is that it causes a divide. Am I trying to breach your boundaries or, impede on your home time? Absolutely not. I'm calling to work on a project, right? So that's a boundary setting where it causes there's a distance that happens. There's an assumption that you need this information in order to respect me. And if I don't keep you at bay, then you're going to cross my boundaries. You're going to compromise me, right? You're going to step into my home time.
What could she have said?
Okay, yeah. So honoring myself would be assuming that the other person had great intentions. And it would also be assuming that there's different schedules and different value systems out there. So honoring myself would be, I'm so glad you called, or I'm looking forward to working on this with you. You know what, 9:30 is too late for me. So I honored the fact that I can't speak after 9:30, but I didn't put it on you as a boundary, as in, here's my line drawn in the sand. Now, it's very subtle because
I was just going to say that. It's so subtle.
It is very subtle. But let's take it to a marriage example, right? So let's say the husband, a woman's husband says something that feels disrespectful or feels hurtful. So boundary making would be a woman saying, you can't speak to me like that. Or I can't be spoken to like that. And there's a sense of this divide, like you're liable to speak to me in a certain way, and I need to make it clear to you that you can't speak to me like that. So nobody should be speaking negatively or criticizing you or name calling, chas v'shalom, right? That's not what we want for a woman. So what if there's a negative interaction in your relationship and a husband says something that's hurtful, right? So how does a woman protect herself if I'm not going to set that boundary? So honoring yourself is honoring yourself is where you are conveying your self-respect in a way that is inspiring, in a way that inspires his desire to respect you, without putting him across a divide and subconsciously labeling him as hurtful, right? So saying something like, honoring myself would be saying something like, I know you care, and that hurt. Or, it's not like you to criticize me on Erev Shabbos. So what happens is when I share with my husband, I know you care and that really hurt, I'm honoring myself by letting him know that hurt me, that touched me in a vulnerable place. And I'm also honoring the care that he has for me by letting him know that I don't assume that it was intentional, and I don't assume that he's out to get me, and I don't assume I need to protect myself from him.
But what about a husband who a wife really does feel like she has to protect herself from him? He is verbally abusive. Yeah.
So these type of scenarios I only deal with on one-on-one because it's so nuanced.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But there is a way out of that also. There's a way how to honor yourself in that context that really changes the whole dynamic of the relationship into one that's much softer and supportive.
So you're not saying like it's okay, let us stay like this forever. It's just another
No.
way to improve things.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, it's a way of respecting or honoring how I want to be treated and how I deserve to be treated, without putting you down in the process, without putting the other person or assuming that the other person, has bad intentions or is liable to compromise me in some way.
As I'm listening and I'm hearing you say about how you could really express something and even something like hurt, and you could say it in a softer manner, in a feminine manner, even when the husband might do something that hurts you. But what's coming to my mind, and I think comes up a lot in conversations, people have this question, is that like, it's almost like an unfair burden is placed on the woman. Like, she has to figure out how to communicate. She was just hurt. And like, she has to figure out how to communicate, and she has to decide, work on the Shalom Bayis, or improve the dynamic, or improve the relationship. And I think that this is a question people have on relationships in general. Like, from the husband to relationship 2.0 for the men. Like, why are you putting, why is it always the woman?
Yeah. I get this question every day from my children. Have you ever had two children in a fight and you go and tell one, like, this one hit that one and that one kicked that one, and then whichever one you're going to tell them, like, kicking is not acceptable in our house, what's their response going to be?
Why are you talking to me? Go to the other one.
Exactly. Why are you talking to me? Tell him. So apparently we don't really outgrow that sentiment. And it is hard. It is, and this is part of, the humbling piece that you shared in the beginning so beautifully, that it is humbling to own my side. It doesn't mean that the other person is not accountable. They are. But just like when you break up a fight with your children, each one has to own their side. You can't not own your side until the other person owns their side, because they're not going to own their side until you own your side. Is that the dynamic you want in your relationship? But that's what we do when we insist, no, I'm not going to own my side until he owns his side. And the question is, am I mature enough to say, wait, I have a side to own here, so let me own it, because that's my responsibility, nothing to do with him.
It's interesting because I went straight to the myths just because, in recent interactions, questions that have come up. But I'd really love if you can do for the, give a little bit, like, take a step back and give us, like, literally relationships on one foot. Like, mashpia, makabel, relationship. Obviously, you can teach this for hours and hours and hours and hours. But, like, we've been doing snippets. But can you share with us, like, no matter how far your knowledge is, like, whether somebody listening knows zero, or they know some words, like they've learned some Hasidus or some, give us an overview, your elevator pitch for a relationship.
So I don't have a formal elevator pitch for a relationship, but if you want a relationship on one foot, it's really Hillel Hazaken's statement. Don't do it to someone else what you don't want done to yourself. How do you want to be seen? When you share, when you make a mistake, a good friend, how do you want your good friend to see you? You want to be seen as somebody who's valuable, somebody who's worthy, somebody who's, even if I made a mistake or I embarrassed myself, you want the other person to assume that you have good intentions and that there's value to your thinking. So a lot of the relationship work is really, we have so much judgment and so many like hardcore beliefs that we bring to our relationships, and to really become aware of them and soften and see your spouse the way you'd want to be seen. which can be really tricky because Hashem designed men and women to be different. And here's the part that we teach in Relationshipi that is so, like the revolutionary piece that you shared, is that we really operate from different paradigms. Like we really have different thought processes. And we often tend to, limit the differences between men and women as physical differences. But they are actually spiritual differences, and they are emotional differences, and they're psychological differences. They're literal differences, and it's also documented in science. So, there's out in the world, there's one definition for emotionally healthy. And it doesn't take into account that there's actually legitimate differences between a man's emotional health and a woman's emotional health. It's going to look different. And that's a gift, that's a kayach that Hashem gave to a man, and that's a kayach that Hashem gave to a woman. And to recognize that it's a gift, our differences are important. So, for example, a man was given the kayach to be more stoicism. And in the feminine world, we look at that as, oh my goodness, you don't know how to express your emotions. You're not in touch with your emotions. That's not healthy. You need to speak about what you're feeling in order to work it through. But that is a feminine form of working through our emotions. Masculine form is very different. Stoicism is a gift. It's the strength that has us feeling more comfortable at night when our husbands are home. Right.
Margita, that was a great elevator pitch. I love how you phrase this idea of like, don't do unto others, but you don't look. That's so nice and so beautiful. And it's true. We do want to be valued, and we do want to, everything that you teach in your work, we do want that to be given to us. So this is about us doing our work and giving that to our husbands and, acknowledging the differences. I'm just wondering, like, in today's day and age, when so many women are working and they're also like, quote unquote, like a mashpia, like a provider, like, how does that work? Like, meaning today's society, we're equal. So like, isn't it degrading to let the husband, like, isn't this an old fashioned concept? Mashpia, makaba, like, how does this go with today's modern reality?
Yeah. So
sorry, before you answer, to add,
yeah.
I see a lot of conversations about this also, where it like becomes about like dividing the domestic duties because they're working, a lot of conversation around it. Like, I'm just curious if you could give us some clarity around the crux of this.
Yeah. So when it comes to dividing responsibilities, we have to go back to Torah. What is a man's responsibility according to Torah? What's a woman's responsibility according to Torah? We have to recognize who's helping who and whose domain, what is in whose domain. So it's the man's domain to provide. Now, if a woman feels that she wants to work or that her family needs her to work, that's a separate discussion. But the piece here that's important for her is to choose a work that is enjoyable for her. So it's not that she's just putting out effort to provide, which is a masculine trait, but it's that she's receiving something from her work at the same time. So therefore, even if I'm working and even if my work is generating money, it's not that what's driving me is not pure output. I'm actually simultaneously receiving. And if I find myself working to the point where I am exhausting myself, that is, even if it's a job that I enjoy, but I'm pushing to the point where now I'm putting out and I'm not simultaneously receiving, then that would be something to look at. What would it look like to drop some of those responsibilities? As women, our responsibility is our homes. That also could be exhausting, So it's important for a woman to look at what in my home is not enjoyable for me, and how can I explore opening up those areas so that it is enjoyable for me.
Sargita, I want to ask you something else.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't mind, I'm kind of like speaking for the masses, or different conversations that come up and different questions people have. But there's somehow like a question that in all this, when I'm doing all the work to, and you really explained it so far well about honoring yourself, etc. But there's still somehow this feeling that if I'm not going to get it all out and really express my rage, or then I'm going to be repressing my feelings. Like, I don't want to just say something softly and gently, like, rah, I want to get it all out there. I want, you know what I mean? Like, am I just pushing down a fire and then it's going to come out in an unhealthy way? Like,
yeah. So it's, Chassidus explains that our feelings are not independent. It's the end product of a chain of things that came before it. So there's my feelings. My feelings comes from my perspective, but my perspective also doesn't come from nowhere. My perspective comes from my character. And my character also doesn't just come from nowhere. My character comes from the capacity of my awareness, or my kayach of chachma. Now, the example that the Tanya brings is of a child, right? A child getting angered by small things. So let's give that example for a moment. Let's flesh it out. Imagine you're at a simcha, and there's a delicious dessert table, and you're about to reach for one of those cookies. There's one left, and someone else takes it, right? As an adult, you'd be disappointed perhaps, but you'd be okay, right? Now, a child, if they're at a simcha, let's say you're with your 5-year-old daughter, and she sees that last dessert and she reaches for it and someone else gets it first, will be devastated, right? So if you fall on the floor by the simcha, tantruming and throwing things, that would be really sad. But if your 5-year-old daughter did, that would be normal, age appropriate, right? And you just understand that she's tired and wanted that dessert. So what happened? Are you repressing your feelings? Are you not communicating?
You have an expanded maturity.
Exactly. So for a child, let's rewind the things. Her feelings is devastation. Why? Because her perspective is, I'm deprived. Okay? It's the end of the world. Deprivation is very painful. Now, why does she feel deprived? Because her core character, her ego, is still self-centered. So we're all born self-centered, and the process of maturing is the process of opening up that center of ego to be able to see and include others. So since her character is still self-centered, so therefore, if I don't get what I want right now, I can't see someone else's desire for that cookie. I can't see any other options for what I want. It's over, right? The world has come to an end. Now, even if you were to tell the child, look, here's another dessert, or like, it's okay, let's go to the, whatever you're going to tell the child, right? Like, she's not going to be okay with that in a certain mindset. Why? Why can't she hear, take another dessert? Because the capacity for awareness, her core chachma, is not fully matured yet. So our chachma matures by the age of 20. And until then, especially a small child, it's not mature enough. She can't handle context. She doesn't understand that there's a greater context, let's say, of, sweet things to enjoy. So I didn't have this one, so I'll have that one. She can't understand that yet. If, depending on what her feeling is, but let's say she feels, to give a different example here, if she feels that the mother deprived her, right, and therefore she feels not loved, right? So a child doesn't have the context for a relationship beyond what's happening right this moment. She also doesn't have an understanding of the context of time. 5 minutes is 5 years, is 5 centuries, is forever. There's no relationship there to time. So, and a child doesn't have the capacity for that. But as a person matures, their capacity expands, and hopefully, and that allows their ego to have the option to expand, which we expand by working on our perspectives, which then changes our feelings. So when we talk about repressing our feelings, we want to notice my feeling is the end product of my perspective right now, which is a product of where my ego is holding right now. And I'm an adult. I have the capacity for awareness to be able to target my ego and my perspective. And that will generate a completely different feeling. So I'm not repressing my feelings. I'm developing my feelings.
Wow. I love it, because I think, kind of in my mind, when they talk about Tanya, about a little kid having like an immature das and therefore they get upset about ice cream, I kind of thought that when you get older, you still have the same emotion, but about a different thing. I wasn't thinking about not just expanding what you're getting upset, but everything that you were saying about like the context, the relationship, like, because really you could be like a 5-year-old at the age of 25, just replace the item with something else.
Exactly.
The charity, according to what you're saying, is not just about what you're getting upset about, right? Losing $1,000 as opposed to $1, but it's also everything else that comes with it. So you're saying that you're not repressing, you're redirecting, you're generating new feelings. You're going to the root. You're not going to the symptom. You're going to the root, and in that sense, it's very, very holistic, right? Like you get to like.
Yeah, and it's a maturity process where it's not that you're not missing that tantrum at all. You actually have developed.
Right. It's like an emotional maturity that maybe just doesn't happen by itself. It's something that we have to work on. Like maybe physical maturity happens, but emotional maturity, like we got to do the work.
Yeah.
Wow, it's pretty amazing. I wonder though, like if all this work like makes the relationship like almost unnatural. Like, wait, let me think. Where does it come from? What do I have to think? Like, where's my energy? Like, isn't it better to just like be normal and natural rather than like having to psychoanalyze everything you're going to say?
Yeah. I love going back to the child example because it's so relatable. It's so like clear, the contrast. But imagine if we were to allow our kids to just do what was natural. Right? Like even training how you hold your fork. So it's once in the beginning, it's uncomfortable, or learning how to drive, right? In the beginning, it's uncomfortable, but you're learning a skill. You're maturing, you're developing yourself. That's not a natural process. So animals in the wild will develop naturally according to the instinct that Hashem gave them and according to the plan, and it's exact and they never deviate, and it is what it is. But as humans, we have the kayach of bechira, we have choice, we have growth, and we know that we're growing when it doesn't feel natural. That's how we know we're learning something.
Wow, that's how you know. In other words, it's not about being stilted. It's about growth. It's about getting out of our comfort zone.
Correct.
But does it ever sound forced?
So it really depends how you're doing it. Like you noted in the beginning, if I come to this work with the, tips and techniques style, then I've missed the whole point. It's not tips and techniques. So, but if I come to this work from a place of really expanding myself, really receiving the gift of this relationship, all growth happens in relationship.
There's another piece of advice that I've heard so often, and people like really well-meaning also have told me this, like, you must have a date night once a week if you want to have a good relationship. And I'm curious your taking up on it.
Yeah. Yeah. It comes back with, the tips and tricks for our relationship and not understanding what actually builds connection. So I know for myself, I know many couples who will invest or will be very committed to date night, or will want date night, or will feel like if I don't have date night, then we're not working in our relationship. And so when we look at building a relationship as things we do, we can often get stuck, because what if you go out on a date night and you don't like where your husband takes you? What if you go out on a date night and he doesn't have even a plan where he's going to take you? Okay, but what if you have a plan? You know where you're going. Maybe you set the same place every week so that it's clear and you don't have that, that worry or that anxiety. What if the conversation doesn't go well? What if you go out and you're having a great conversation, but then he interrupts it to take a phone call? There are so many things that can get in the way of a date night. Is it the date night that builds the connection? I know for myself, date night was the most stressful night of the week. By the time I got the kids into bed, and the expectation that my husband should come home early in order to help them get into bed. And if I felt that he wasn't taking enough initiative to, get the house quiet so that we could leave. And by the time he got the babysitter and we got out the door, I was exhausted. So date night sounds great, but if we don't understand what connection is actually built from, it can be a minefield. So connection is built every time I acknowledge value. Think about it. I can have the greatest time or the greatest connection in a moment. Let's say, the house is a mess, the kids are going wild, but your eyes connect with your husband in that moment. And there's just this sweet, gosh, what a circus, right? There's a connection there. You've exchanged a moment of value.
But what if you need time? Like you need an hour and a half. You need quality time. It's not enough for you, like a little.
Yeah, you definitely should enjoy dates together. That's a great thing to do. What I'm saying is a date night to work on our connection is where it gets really tricky. Because, once I'm there, then that date night becomes a measure. Do you care about connecting to me? Are you putting in the effort to connect to me? Is our time together connecting? It becomes a very pressurized measure, as opposed to just a, something that happens organically or naturally, or even by request, but has nothing attached to it. So the connection itself, the core connection, happens when I acknowledge value. So for example, let's say you're out on a date and your husband takes a phone call, right? That phone call could be, could drain you and could drain your connection if you see it as
the whole thing.
Yeah, could ruin the whole night. Or that phone call could be something that you find value in, that let's say he cares about your son, right? Your son called and you're a great father. I love that. And if you look at it, well, how long was that exactly? 5 minutes, right? But those 5 minutes, if I see that as personal, is going to ruin my night. But those 5 minutes, if I see it as a moment to admire, like, you're such a good father, right? It will actually bring us closer. Or conversation. So if I recognize that connection is built when I acknowledge value, I can acknowledge the value just that we are out together. That's connection. So even if my conversation is not, the best conversation I've had, or it's not a DMC, if I'm standing in the value of, that was so special that you took me out today, then I'm connecting.
Doesn't that make you settle for mediocrity?
Not at all. Not at all. It actually allows real emotional connection to flow. because when there's safety in a relationship, when I'm coming back to mashpia and makabel, when I'm receptive to my husband's value and I actually see it, I develop the eyes to see it and I notice it and I take it in, you know, that's where real emotional connection, safety, sharing, tenderness, and love blossoms.
Wow. Wow. It's so beautiful. What I'm hearing you saying is that, you know, without even realizing it, my question might be full of fear. Like, if you're going to compliment or be okay with it, then maybe you won't get something good enough, but you're actually saying that you get something much better than good enough. Like, you're getting that real connection, and that's really what you're craving deep down, if I may say.
Correct.
That's so beautiful. So Sargita, where could people like find out more about all this stuff?
Yeah, you can go to createrelationship.com. You can reach out with an email, createrelationship@gmail. Anything else that you can?
That's great. Okay. It's just that we hope to put this live, you know, both on Instagram and YouTube. So wherever you're watching us, you can find more of Sargita's work. I really hope all of you that are watching enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. It was extremely insightful. Sargita, is there like one last point that you want to just leave us off with?
Yeah. You can have beautiful Shalom Bayis, not just in your marriage, but in every relationship. And we know that our relationships, the shalom between us, is so valuable. It's what is going to bring the geula.
Amazing. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Sargita, for your time. Yeah, and I bench all of us with just more and more shalom Bayis in the bias, you know, amongst everyone, peace in the home, between spouses, between families, and yeah, may it bring the final geula. Thank you. Thank you, Sargita.